to another watch list, my rundown of what I've been watching, what I've been up to. We have usually 5, but I'm going to throw in a bonus one because I've got 2 that are linked together this week. So we've got 6 films to talk about this week, and they're all in the, well, realm of spooky season, since this will come out pretty much on Halloween. So I've tried to pick the films that are spooky, both in theme, whether in terms of monsters or horror, or psychologically disturbing in some way. First one up is a release from the Black Label from 101 Films, and a recent-ish release of Hell Night. And Hell Night is a slasher, a teen slasher that is based around fighters from a fraternity. Now, Hell Night comes in this nice case for the first release, where you have the ordinary release, which will get standard release when it sells out. And this will get a decent enough book, which I haven't read yet, have to say, but I will get to it. Either way, what is Hell Night? Well, Hell Night is one of those teen slashers, and it tells the story of a group of 4 young people who are pledging to fraternity, like I said, and they have to spend the night in what is supposedly a haunted house. So the rest of the fraternities, both male and female, gang together to set them up, and they have to get through the night in this place. Now, there's 2 male, 2 female, so it's set up for the usual titular sex comedy of some sort that goes with an awful lot of slashers. But what if that house actually is haunted, or at least has a malevolent person there, being or spirit or whatever, something there at the moment already. So while the fraternities have rigged the house so that it's full of traps so they can scare and spook them out all the rest of the night, maybe there's something going on there that is a bit more than meets the eye. And Linda Blair, who you'll recognise from lots of films around this stage, takes top billing, and it's a bit of a weird choice for me because she's the one person that in this thing that is not interested in, you know, sex or relationships or anything like that. So it makes me think, what the hell is she joining the fraternity for in the first place? But getting past all that, she plays that innocent type that she does, that kind of you want to root for, the person you don't think deserves anything bad coming to it. And from there, it's a pretty decent, I would say, slasher film with lots of like cool or interesting deaths and ways that people meet their ends. It has a decent thought of menace in it. There's a decent menace that runs throughout the whole thing, and ultimately you get something that's a lot of fun. And on top of that, what we have on the disc here is an absolute truckload of great extras. Anybody that's been following the Black Label will know that this is actually par for the course for this entire line. They pick so movies and support them with lots and lots of great extras. And actually, the extras here really enhance my enjoyment of the film. Not only have we got interviews from most of the cast, people that had given up on acting but were talked into the last minute, with Linda Blair, who basically, for all intents and purposes, was the driving force behind even the making of the film. And we have a director who came from kind of soft porn or otherwise to making this type of movie, and you can definitely see some of that on screen. It's a really interesting package, and one that I thoroughly enjoyed, especially for somebody like me that is sort of hit and miss with slashers. You know, not that I dislike them, but they seem to be very samey for me a lot of the way. So Hell Night was good fun. On the total opposite end of the spectrum, I've got a Eureka Masters of Cinema release here from earlier on the year, and that is V. And V is a Russian folk horror tale that's only about 75 minutes in length, so perfectly palatable and something you could stick on for a while. Now, this is the limited 2-set edition. It has a bonus film, or a disc with another film by the same author of the original story of V, of the original folk tale. But we're not here to talk about that. We're here to talk about the main release itself. Now, you'll probably see this probably comes up better on camera with the extra light that I've got here. But this is one of the worst covers that I've ever seen. You actually can't see very much at all in normal light. This writing that's blue that comes up here doesn't come up at all when I'm looking at natural light, and it's almost impossible to read. But I digress. What is V? So V is you know, it strikes me actually the most similar film that I can think of to it is something like House, which it seems like a strange mix, especially for something that was about 1967, 68 made in Russia. It's this kind of off the wall, like I say, folk horror tale. So, film starts with people travelling through. They go to stay in a house, and the house actually belongs to a witch. She wants to take advantage of one of the young men, and he ends up killing her. Now, as he kills her, she turns into a beautiful young lady or young woman, and this body is found. And by hook or by crook, when it's taken back to the village, the penance, or the thing that has been set for the man who killed her, or the person that's responsible for killing her, is that he has to spend 3 nights with this person in the church. And if he survives 3 nights, he'll get 1,000 gold coins or something like that. Okay, that's your setup. And that takes the first half an hour of the film. So for a film that's only 75 minutes long, first half an hour is set up with this kind of premise or setup. And then we get these 3 nights that are set up after it of the philosopher staying in the crypt or the church with the body. And the witch, although dead, somehow plays more and more psychological and mental and physical tricks. He plays with his fears and his concerns for his own life, I would say. And they get more and more wacky as the days go on. The camera work gets more and more interesting. The costumes, everything gets more and more interesting. And in some ways, I think it's actually done better than Houseu. Houseu goes completely off the wall, I think, and takes advantage of how off the wall it goes by using lots of weird blue and green screen to the point that you think it's not even believable. Whereas this one actually looks a bit more set and a bit more realistic in how they've went to do it. I think V is tremendous. Especially by the time you get to the 3rd night, you're so in for enjoyment on it that you can't help but go along for the ride. And the last night is one of the funnest things that probably you'll ever see in any cinema of this type. And it did strike me that something like Encounters of the Spooky Kind that I think I talked about a months ago with Sammo Hung, riffs an awful lot on V. And riffs an awful lot of the ideas that are on here, because the performances are great, but in typical Russian cinema style. And I have to say, all these greats of Russian cinema that I've seen recently just go to show how utterly incredible the talent of filmmaking is from that region. You know, not only have you got interesting stories to tell, you've got incredible camera work. Like there's a bit in the first night where the camera spins around with both the witch and a protagonist, the philosopher, kind of spinning around the lectern, and it's just amazing how, when you think in practicality, how it's done. And I see an awful lot of this in Russian cinema, this great camera work that goes along. But the utterly fantastic film. There is a comedy by Michael Brook. There is a making of documentary in there as well, and then an audio essay on the author of the original V Tale. Which is really interesting, especially if you think of it as a podcast. It's only about 18 minutes long or so. So an utterly great release of V. And if you can pick up this limited edition set with a nice slipcover that there is a standard version with 1 disc that looks a bit like that if you want to keep out of it. That is spine number 244, again from earlier on this year. Next up on my spooky season is a film from 2017, and it's I would say fairly acclaimed. It's an A24 film, but it is A Ghost Story by David Lowery. Now, David Lowery is a really interesting director for me, because he is somebody that I toyed with on the idea of doing a 2018 in film series about. And I know there's only been 1 episode of that, but bear with me. There's another one in the can that I just need to release. Because David Lowery's films, I think, are extremely interesting. And this is no different from that. Even from his very first experimental short film, I've seen a lot of his work, and this one tells the story of Casey Affleck and Rooney Mara, who are a couple that move in together and are living together, and Casey Affleck's character dies pretty much at the start of the film, and his character passes on to the other side, but he comes back to exist in the world as a ghost, and he gets to see his partner Rooney Mara cope with his death and cope with the period of grief, and how she moves on and adjusts her life with him not being there. Now, how this is portrayed on screen is quite memorable because it's pretty much a white sheet put over his head with holes put in. So, I mean, why it's not a very ethereal ghost. It's very much present in the room as he stands and watches her cope and go through all the ordeal and torment that people do when going through grief. The film then goes kind of fluidly through time because in death in this world is not very linear. You know, they jump backwards and forwards in time, and he gets to see about, you know, parts of the relationship that he was there for and that he was not there for, of the frustrations that Rooney Mara's character had in the relationship and where they lived and where she wanted to live, and then also some of the bits that he was there for and how good the relationship was and how much they meant to each other for long periods of it. And this kind of makes the film a bit unsettling because you don't know where you are necessarily all the times, but there are enough little clues dropped and bits here and there that I think start to make sense. There's a rather famous scene with Rooney Mara eating a trifle or a cake, something like that, and that a lot of people seem to object about, but I think it's both very uncomfortable to watch for good reason, because you get some sense of the individuality or the feeling of her grief and how she's dealing with that and what forms that might take, whether they are palatable or otherwise. I think David Lowery's films are absolutely terrific. I think he's a really interesting filmmaker. He is somebody that I think is one of those really interesting voices, and the extras in here talk about that he has a bit of a round table with people. And you also have Rooney Mara and you have Casey Affleck, who it's basically much a two-hander of a film where I think they're both terrific actors, and they really get an awful lot out of those performances. And in true David Lowery style, he uses Will Oldham really, really well in this one as well. If you don't know who Will Oldham is, you may know him from Mate One as being the young man there, but he's now a singer, songwriter of some repute as well. But yeah, that's the Ghost Story, and I dearly love the Ghost Story, even if it's a film that's hard to recommend as being an easy watch. It's not scary, but it is, you know, a drama of some repute, I think. Next up is my double-hander, so two films that I'm going to put together. And the first one is The Werewolf from the Cold War Creatures box set from Arrow that came out recently. Now, The Werewolf, it lays an awful lot of the groundwork for, you know, what people know or think of as the modern werewolf tale. So The Werewolf, I think, is the pick of the four films out of the Cold War Creatures box set. And it not only tells the story of the werewolf, but also gives it some gravitas. So the film starts with a stranger going into a bar in a small town, and he gets some hassle from some of the regulars, so he leaves. But as he's leaving, he gets set upon by one of the people from the bar who basically wants to accost him as he's leaving. Now, you don't get to see everything that happens as they disappear in an alley, but the man and the aggressor ends up in not so great a way, as we believe that he is attacked by an animal, and we just see one of the local passers-by screaming an old lady at the horror of what she is seeing, and we see an animal running away from the scene, and there is the setup for the film. Now, the film, I think, rather predictably turns into a bit of a manhunt after that, so they're trying to find the creature. They go into the hills, but that isn't just where it ends, because they also give some background to this man. So who was he? How did he get in this state? What kind of people did he have in his life beforehand? And when he's hiding out and thinking of existence for himself, what impact is that going to have on the people that are there and around him and the people that are hunting him as well? I think it gives it real pathos, and it gives it a real sense, like I say, of gravitas, and give it something a bit more than is just the B-movie level films that seem to be in the rest of the film. I think it's understandable a little bit, but this Cold War Creatures box set is very much that B-movie science fiction film from around those mid to late 50s by a producer called Sam Katzman. It was very much about making money and trying to make films that were popular and gonna fill out theatres, etc. I think they're all really interesting, but this is definitely the pick of the four films, and definitely something that I think, if you know anything about what werewolves have become and what kind of lore that is made of those, you'll recognise. So pairing with that is the recent 40th anniversary release from Studio Canal of The Howling, which is a Joe Dante film, which again is another werewolf film. Now, The Howling, this was a first time watch for me. I hadn't seen The Howling before. And it's again a film that's split into two. The first part centres on a news anchor, or a woman that works for a local news station, Karen, who tries to entrap a local creep, or a person that they think is responsible for a spate of murders and attacks around that time. But in the midst of doing this, she gets attackers involved in a rather unusual encounter with this person before they are seemingly shot dead. And rather than move on from this, she's got some psychological trauma that kind of follows on from that, and she is advised by a doctor, psychiatrist or otherwise, to take some time with her husband to move out to the colony or commune far away. Now, the colony, it'll not take a genius to work out, is not just all that it seems, but she goes to spend there and things happen there, and again there's a setup for the film. Now, it runs in two ways after this, because that first part, for the most part, starts to talk about the psychological trauma of the idea of the werewolf, and how its kind of psychosexual leanings are not easily just forgotten. It really plays in that and has a real tone and, I think, eeriness of it. I mean, it strikes very much of a very good screenplay, which is written by John Seals. There's an awful lot in it. And I think once it moves past that and then into what is, you know, the werewolf stage or the hunt stage, or the bit that maybe is a bit slicerish as people start to get attacked or otherwise, that runs alongside what is an investigation part of trying to think actually or see what has happened, you know, the killings and the people and the events that are happening there. There's a lot of ideas swirling around, and as events happen in the film, more and more starts to make sense. But really the second half of the film is the vehicle for the special effects, so the practical special effects by Rob Bottin, who most people will know most famously for, you know, The Thing, which was a year later than this, for the practical effects that are in there, because they're astonishingly good. I think they age so well, much like The Thing, and the werewolf transformation is one of my favourites that I've ever seen. So while I think the second half of the movie isn't as good a filmmaking or as good or well executed as maybe the first half, I think actually the film's more memorable scenes are definitely in the second half. So it kind of creates this nice balance between the two, as, like I say, the transformations are just, will live long in the memory, just like they will in The Thing, and that's what makes these films really stand up. Special effects are so, you know, with CGI, etc., but practical effects really stand the test of time well and stand up strong. So two films that I enjoyed, especially around the same thing, especially, you know, in the extras of The Howling, they do talk about the origins of the werewolf story being with the Kurt Siodmak film, and also how Joy Dante then got involved and made The Howling, which I think is a pretty terrific release, which I think is a great print as well. I only seen the Blu-ray version. There is a 4K version. I can only imagine how well that looks, but the Blu-ray version is spectacularly good, I think, anyway. And that brings me on to my last film. And this last film isn't really much of a horror film, but it is chilling. It is a recommendation from my good friend Carl at Into the Blue, from one of his top 5 lists, and it's one that I picked up on his recommendation, and it's Martha, Marcy, May and Marlene, which is a 2011 film starring principally Elizabeth Olsen. And Elizabeth Olsen plays a character called Martha, who joins a cult after leaving home. And she gets involved with the cult, and the film starts basically with her fleeing the cult and making a break for the town, where she phones her sister, played by Sarah Paulson, to come and get her. But before she goes to leave, one of the cult members makes a last play to come back to the cult, or commune if you want. And when she gets picked up and brought back by her sister, who's living there with her partner, they're trying for a baby, all that kind of stuff, you start to see some of the things that happened to Elizabeth Olsen's character, to Martha, as she lived in this commune, and it was under the control of a cult leader called Patrick, and Patrick played amazingly by John Hawkes, and he's incredibly creepy. He's a person that you'll recognise from other things, but he's incredibly effective as being this evil cult leader whose motivations I don't think are anything pure at all, but charismatic all the same, as many cult leaders are professed to be. And Martha's life, she was renamed May, Marcy, etc. in the cult to give her new identity, starts to experience both in this kind of fluid time state of the things that happened to her in the past and what's happened to her in the present, and some of these things start to bleed over for herself, and you really get a sense of how horrific some of the things were that happened to her beforehand, but also how dangerous that is for the people around her in the meantime. And it's a really strong examination of the impact of trauma, the impact of how mental health can be, just irreparably damaged by trauma or otherwise. And you really fear and wonder if Elizabeth Olsen's character will ever get over these things, because she's just terrific in this. I mean, it's an absolutely incredible performance by anybody, but especially for a at that stage a much younger actor, that to really take on something that's really so meaty as that, and to really make you worry for somebody's well-being in the short space of the runtime of this film. I think it's an absolutely terrific film, and one that is maybe in some ways more disturbing than all the films that I've talked about previously without the aid of monsters. But human monsters are often the worst type of monster that you can see, and there's a lovely sense of dread that starts to build throughout the film, both in terms of her character and her sister and her relationships that are going on, and whether there's any saving Martha going forward. Thanks, Carl, for the recommendation. It was an absolutely brilliant film that I really enjoyed, and actually sat and watched it with a wife, and to be honest, as much as we enjoyed the film, I think we were just incredibly bowled over by the quality of performance that Elizabeth Olsen put in for it. So that's my watch list for the week. I get 5/6 movies for you this week to see. Let me know if you've seen any of them, as usual. Let me know what you've been watching yourself, and always looking forward to other recommendations from the people that have been watching us as well, so that I can know what to spend my time doing for the rest of the month up until the end of the year. Thanks very much for watching. If you've made it this far, take care, and I'll speak to you soon.